So today we're going to talk about cells and homeostasis. This is how cells maintain balance in your body. Before we can really talk about that though, we need to talk about what homeostasis itself is. So homeostasis, just as a review, is how your body stays in balance. When your body is out of balance, it will try to stabilize. So for instance, if you get too hot, your body will try to cool down. If your blood sugar gets too high, your body will try and lower your blood sugar levels. It does this through a mix of negative and positive feedback loops that we talked about in another lesson. Now, when we talk about homeostasis, we usually will talk about it on sort of a body level, but things are also happening at a cellular level. So we need to talk about what cells are. Cells are the smallest living thing. Your entire body is made up of cells. And there are two types of cells. The first are prokaryotic. So things like bacteria are prokaryotic. They're very small, they're very simple, don't even have a nucleus, don't have a lot of organelles. Then we have eukaryotic cells. We are eukaryotic. Cats are eukaryotic. Plants are eukaryotic. Mushrooms are eukaryotic. Eukaryotic cells are more complicated. They have more organelles. They do have a nucleus, and they tend to be a little bit bigger and can be multicellular. But regardless of whether they're prokaryotic or eukaryotic, all cells have the same four things. All of them have DNA. This is our genetic material, recipes for proteins. They determine traits. There's also cytoplasm. So all of the parts of the cell have to be floating in something. That's just what the cytoplasm is, the gunk that the stuff in the cell floats in. All cells also have a cell membrane. A cell membrane is the stuff around the outside of the cell. It determines what goes in and out of the cell. Really important organelle that we're going to talk about in more depth in a second. All cells also have ribosomes. So DNA code for protein, it has the blueprints for proteins, but ribosomes are where those proteins actually get made. So if DNA is like the recipe, then ribosomes are like the cooks. They actually make this stuff. But those are just the things that all cells have. Like I said, eukaryotic cells are a little more complicated, so they have more complicated organelles. Organelles, these are just like small little structures inside of the cells. They all have their own purpose. We just talked about a couple of organelles right now, but there are more in eukaryotic cells. The big one is the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. What it does is it takes your food and it turns it into energy, or you might think of it as taking sugar and turning it into ATP. Really big function there. We also have lysosomes. These take waste in the cell and break it down so that we can get rid of it. We also have vacuoles. These are really used for storage. We can also use them a little bit for waste disposal, as they can help move things out of the cell as well. Other organelles that we have the endoplasmic reticulum. This is really used for making macromolecules, those big molecules that we talked about at the beginning of the year. So they can make carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. We've got rough and smooth ER, which have different functions, make different kinds of macromolecules. We have the Golgi, which is sort of like the post office. It packages materials and sends them to where they need to go in the cell. The last organelle we're going to talk about is actually one that is special to plants, the chloroplast. So this is used for photosynthesis. It captures light and it makes food. And this is only found in plant cells. So only plants are able to make their own food. Other eukaryotic cells like animals, fungi, they have to eat other things in order to get food. So that's what sets plants apart from fungi and animals, is that they can make their own food, and that is because they have a chloroplast. Next up, I want to focus on one particular organelle though, the cell membrane. So again, every cell has a cell membrane and it determines what goes in and out of the cell. It's kind of like the guard of the cell. It's made of what we call a phospholipid bilayer, which just means that it has two layers of phospholipids, which are a type of lipid. So through the phospholipid bilayer, small molecules are able to pass through without too much issue. It also has proteins inside of the phospholipids, though, which allow the big molecules to pass through. So when we say that cell membranes determine what goes in and out of a cell, the way they go in and out of the cell is either through the phospholipids or the proteins. Proteins are also special because they can send molecules against the concentration gradient, which we will talk about in a moment when we talk about types of transport. So there are two main types of transport in the cell, but I want to talk first about what a concentration gradient is. So remember concentration gradients? That's just saying how crowded things are together. You always want to move from an area where you're very crowded to an area where you're not very crowded. You want to go from a high concentration to a low concentration. That's naturally how molecules want to move. So passive transport is when they're moving the way that they want to. We're going from high to low. We're getting off of that crowded subway car and going to a place where it's less crowded. So this doesn't require energy because this is naturally where things are going anyways. Active transport is the opposite. It's where we're going from somewhere where it's not very crowded, you've got a lot of space, and shoving you in with a bunch of other things. Going from a low concentration to a high concentration. Not very crowded to very crowded. And this is hard to do. It's hard to sort of elbow your way into a space where there's already a lot of people. So this requires a lot of energy. Active transport requires ATP, and it also requires a protein because the protein has to do something special to move things against the concentration gradient. Finally, this leads us to osmosis. Osmosis is just the diffusion of water, but water can move across the membrane pretty quickly. So water tends to move more than bigger molecules. So this is where you should remember the gummy bear lab. So in the gummy bear lab, we started off with a small little gummy bear, we put it in some water, and then it got a lot bigger. A lot of water went into the gummy bear. That was because the gummy bear was in a hypotonic solution. More water was outside of the bear than inside of the bear, so water moved in to try and balance things out. That's hypotonic. Hypertonic is the opposite. You have more water inside the cell than you do outside the cell, so water will move out and the cell will shrivel up. Finally, you have isotonic, where things are balanced. You have about the same concentration of water inside the cell as outside of the cell, so everything sort of moves in equal measure. Nothing gets too big, nothing gets too small. It stays pretty much the same. You could kind of think of it like, okay, the cell is in homeostasis to its surroundings. So that's it for this overview of cells and homeostasis. Obviously, I went over a lot of material in not a lot of time. So if you need some extra help understanding things, you can either find more information on the pages in Schoology where we have more detailed notes. You can reach out and ask me a question. You can slow the video down and play it again so I move more slowly. You have a lot of options. Please let me know if you need any help, if you're confused at all, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Stay safe, everybody.